since bureaucratic agents are unelected government officials, there has to be some type of democratic process so that way we're able to voice our opinions when they propose sweeping regulatory changes that affect our daily lives. They're supposed to present it to the public and then allow the public to comment for a period of time before ultimately voting on it. Now, when it comes to the issue of net neutrality, we've talked about this multiple times, but the entire process was flawed from the very beginning because there were fraudulent comments using our identities, using the identities of fictional characters to submit anti-net neutrality comments at the behest of internet service providers. Now, because the process was flawed, because we weren't able to effectively make our voices heard, this is one of the many reasons why we all are arguing that the repeal of net neutrality was illegitimate, and I think this is part of the argument that 22 attorneys generals are using in their lawsuit against the FCC. The problem is that the FCC hasn't really acknowledged that the process itself was compromised in any meaningful way. I speculated that maybe it was a troll farm that was, paid by internet service providers. I have no idea. Jessica Rosenworcel, who's an FCC commissioner, states that this was Russian interference, presumably what I'm thinking is a Russian troll farm. And today we finally are seeing Ajit Pai acknowledge that yes, the comment process was in fact compromised. And I'll tell you why his acknowledgement is important for us, but let me get to the story first before we talk about it any further. So as Andrew Wyrich of the Daily Dot reports, Federal Communications Chairman Ajit Pai said it was a fact that there was Russian interference in the public comments ahead of its controversial net neutrality vote last year amid sparring between another commissioner about a lawsuit the agency is in the midst of. The admittance was made in response to a lawsuit filed by the New York Times, who requested access to records surrounding the public comments that they argued would shed light to the extent to which Russian nationals and agents of the Russian government have interfered with the agency notice and comment process about a topic of extensive public interest. The public comments left ahead of the FCC's net neutrality vote have been at the center of much scrutiny, with millions of fraudulent comments, including the names of dead people and current members of Congress, being used. One recent study recently found that of the real comments, nearly 100% were made in favor of the FCC keeping the existing net neutrality rules. The Times used the Freedom of Information Act to request access to server logs and IP addresses. As part of the lawsuit, the FCC released a memorandum opinion earlier this week, arguing in favor of its decision to use FOIA exemptions to block part of the newspaper's request. Both Pai, a Republican, and FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, a Democrat, attached opinions to the memorandum. Rosenworcel came out hard against the FCC in her statement, starting it by asking what the FCC was hiding as part of its defense against the FOIA request. As many as 9.5 million people had their identities stolen and used to file fake comments, which is a crime under both federal and state laws, she wrote. Nearly 8 million comments were filed from email domains associated with fakemailgenerator.com. On top of this, roughly 500,000 comments were filed from Russian email addresses. Something here is rotten, and it's time for the FCC to come clean. In his response, Pai says it is a fact that some of the comments were submitted using Russian email addresses, but argues many of those comments supported net neutrality. The fact comment, as Gizmodo points out, is different than what was said in a court filing related to the lawsuit, where the FCC claims it is not convinced of Russian interference. So this is interesting because we're kind of seeing conflicting claims come from the FCC, but here he's admitting, yes, it is a fact that there was Russian interference, and part of the reason why he says that he's blocking these FOIA requests is because if he approves these FOIA requests, that would make the FCC susceptible to cyber attacks, which doesn't really make any sense to me because FOIA is just what you have to do if you are in charge of an agency. All government agencies have to respond to FOIA requests. That doesn't necessarily make them more vulnerable to cyber attacks. So I don't even think that that argument makes sense, but nonetheless, he's confirming here what we already knew, that the comment process was in fact compromised. And what's interesting to me is that he can't really deny this anymore because there's evidence that it was from Russians. Apparently, Russian email addresses were used in a number of these comments that were filed, because if you want to file a comment, you have to supply them with an email address, and these came from Russian accounts. Now, my speculation is that this came from a Russian troll farm, maybe the same type of troll farm or one related to the memes that we saw posted during the 2016 election. That wouldn't surprise me at all, but the point is that we don't necessarily know, the extent to which Russian meddling occurred. We don't know if that was the only meddling. Maybe it was also industry insiders, like I also speculated. The point is that we need an investigation to get to the bottom of it. That's what we've been saying, is that we need to know what happened. But they wouldn't even acknowledge it, let alone allow for an investigation. But here we have Ajit Pai saying, yeah, it was a fact that there was Russian interference. So this is a positive step in the right direction for advocates of net neutrality, because this kind of strengthens our argument, because we're trying to make a legal case in court for why Ajit Pai's repeal of net neutrality was not just undemocratic, but it was also illegitimate and flawed because he wasn't able to adequately gauge public opinion, because that comment process, which bureaucrats are required to take into consideration when voting on new legislation, or regulatory changes rather, was not able to give him an accurate gauge of what the public was feeling with regard to this issue. So I hope that this will help strengthen our case, at least legally. It certainly doesn't bode well for Ajit Pai when it comes to public opinion, but I don't think he really cares at this point because it's already in the gutter and it's not going to be something that recovers. As I've said it before this video, but I'm repeating it here because I think this is really important. We need an investigation to get to the bottom of it. But since that didn't happen, since the FCC refuses to investigate what happened, since they're refusing to comply with numerous FOIA requests, I think that, well, I feel as if, and I'm not sure because I'm no legal expert, I feel as if we've got to have a really strong legal argument in court. I mean, there's already precedent where when the industry attacked the FCC's 2015 adoption of Title II, it held up in court. And the Supreme Court just rejected hearing them out. So there's already this precedent set where our legal system upholds net neutrality, and I'm just hoping that this all bolsters our case legally. But again, I don't know, and I don't necessarily have that much faith in the American legal system at this point, but it's literally our only hope, because the deadline for Congress to act and restore net neutrality is approaching on December 10th, I believe. And after that, we no longer can pursue, a nullification of the FCC's repeal of Title II through Congress. I mean, they could still pass a bill technically and override the FCC, but that's a lot more difficult to do than just simply signing onto a joint resolution and passing it through the Congressional Review Act. So I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen and how this will play out, but one thing that I do know is our only hope of saving net neutrality is going to come from the courts, and I really hope that Ajit Pai admitting this here is going to strengthen our argument, because we've got to have net neutrality, because a free and open internet is absolutely crucial for a democracy in the 21st century.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.